into the recording device and Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the SAP Ariba Best Practice webinar session. I'm your host, Deborah Nguyen. Today's topic is going to be the administration workshop for procurement. As I said before, this meeting is being recorded and will be shared at a later date. All lines have been muted during the presentation. However, if you have a question, please use the chat feature in WebEx or touch *6 on your phone to unmute your line. If you're having trouble seeing the presentation, you can send me an email at Deborah, D-E-B-O-R-A, .wynn, W-Y-N-N, at SAP.com, and I will work with you to get you into the presentation. On today's webinar, we're going to cover how to use some of the most popular and powerful administrator tools. This will include user management, setting administrative permissions, data imports and exports, approval rules, delegations, and managing enumerations for your field drop-down values. Our presenters for today is Alice Hillary. She's on our best practice team. Alice, are you ready? *6 to unmute yourself, Alice.
So while you're waiting for Alice to join, can you restate what you said about joining the WebEx? Because
all guests have been muted. You can unmute your line by pressing *6.
It says,
all right, we're going to,
I'm not registered.
I'm sorry. Say that again?
Can you re-explain what to do if you can't get into the WebEx? Because it asks us to register, and when we try to register, it says our email exists already.
Okay. If you send an email to Deborah, D-E-B-O-R-A, .wynn, W-Y-N-N, at SAP, I will send you another link to try.
D-E-B-O-R-A, Wynn, W-I-N-N, at SAP. Okay, thank you.
W-Y-N-N.
Got it. Thank you.
Sure. All right, I think Alice is having some technical difficulties. She's lost her audio. She's logging back in, but we'll give her a few moments. All right, Alice, we can see your screen. We still don't have any audio from you. *6 to unmute.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I kept doing it, but it wasn't working. All right. So slow start there. Sorry about that. Welcome to today's session on the BPC Administration Workshop for Procurement. And this session is primarily intended for procurement administrators. What I mean by that is anyone who has procure to pay, procure to order, or invoice pro. Okay. Take a moment to do an introduction of myself. I am a senior consultant in the Best Practice Center here for SAP Ariba with more than 7 years of experience in the P2P on-demand solution, supporting end users all the way up to administration. My email address is here, but if you have questions, it's actually best to email our group, and I will give you that at the end. Okay. Just a quick overview of what we're going to cover today, and I know that Deborah gave you the course description at the beginning, but this is a high-level overview of core administration. You're going to see there's a lot of areas within the menus here in Procure to Pay for this for these features. Your site may or may not look exactly like the one that you're going to see today, depending on how you're set up. So you may see more or you may see fewer options than you have based on your subscription. We will also offer some future sessions that will delve deeper into these workspaces that are commonly used, such as the user manager, the Procure to Pay manager. Those have a lot of functionality built into them that we can't cover all in one session today, but we could actually take a session and blow it out, and that's what we'll do. We're going to look at all areas for P2P. So if you have P2O and you have Invoice Pro, this material is still applicable, but you're going to find some things will not be, obviously. But your user manager, the invoice, the invoice or receiving, depending on, what your solution is, those can still be applicable to you even though you're not using full P2P. These are some of the administrative roles that we're going to discuss. Again, not all-inclusive, but we're going to talk about core administration, and that's the area that has access to all of the site administration. Your customer catalog manager, that's the group that's going to have access to the catalog manager workspace. Payment administrators are going to have the ability to add and edit payment methods and access to the payment manager workspace. Supplier manager is the one that's going to have access to edit and delete suppliers and access to tasks in the supplier manager workspace. And lastly, procurement manager. This is going to have access to managing your invoice exceptions, your receiving types, and they're going to have access to both the Procure to Pay and Invoice Manager workspace. Okay. Now, again, these are not all inclusive of those, but this is just to let you know that these are permissions that you can use to manage access to the individual workspaces. In being able to access where you get to core administration, if you're familiar with what we call our upstream resourcing and contracts area, you do it through administration. Here you're going to do through what we call core administration, and it's accessed through the Manage menu in your screen. If you don't have those permissions, you will not see this as an option, all right? Then within that, you'll see this list. Again, this list is a list based on what I have access to here, but you're going to see different functions and features that will help you maintain your site. And that's what a lot of today is about, maintaining your site. I'm going to go through each area at a very high level. We'll talk about what that area is. I'm going to bounce into the application so that you can see it. And then I'll pause at the end of each section if you have questions on that specific area. You can be placing those questions in the chat or you can unmute. So that way I'll take a break at each section. And of course, we can follow up later if necessary. The first area within the core administration is Site Manager. And this is used to access your import and export data files. You can also view your user activities. Your data that's coming into Ariba from your external sources, such as your supplier information, accounting, the remittance that comes back on your payments, that can all be viewed in your import files. Your payment requests, which are your OK to Pay file. If you're exporting PO or receipt details out to your ERP, those are visible in your exports. These are very useful if you're reconciling between systems. I know from personal experience, I was required to reconcile my OK to pay file to my external ERP, make sure that what we sent out was actually what was received. These files became very useful for that. The audit log is also good. You can use that to search for user activity by the type of activity, administrative activity versus user activities. This is also useful in monitoring when you have folks in the administrative roles, what's being done. I know my external auditors were often interested in this area. So I'm going to bounce out to our test environment, and this is where, from your home screen, come into Manage and Core Administration. This is where you're going to come in to access these screens. Again, if you are not in the Customer Administrator role or one of those other roles that I mentioned earlier, you are not going to have access to this area. So within the Site Manager, this is our first one, okay? And you can see you have your data import exports and your audit logs. Your data import exports, this is where you're going to be able to see your files, their status. Also, if you're using web service status, this is generally used with SAP. You're going to be able to see the status of those as well. Here's one I'll just quickly take a look at, an individual one. So this is your OK to pay file, your payment request going out. You can see that it was completed on this date. If I wanted to export that file, I could come in and use this. This will also let me know within here how many records, if there was anything changed or updated, and your history will actually let you see on a day-to-day basis what you're doing. This was useful to me in reconciling. Okay, so that's one area. The audit log is useful for managing user activity. I mentioned this before, so you can take a look at your admin and see what activities are happening through administration. So you can see, and what's really nice about this is it's not just that, but who the real user is who's been doing the activity. So you can see that they changed a company information. So there's ideal ways, and you can export all of this information, okay? And then you can do your own analysis on it. All right, before I go over to Customization Manager, if there's any questions on the Site Manager, take those now. All right.
Alice, no questions in the chat window.
Okay, thank you. So Customization Manager, this is an area that's used for uploading and downloading approval files and enumerations. When you look in your approval rules, which is another area of your procurement, you can have files that help build those approvals. They would be visible here. Enumerations help you create a pick list within a field. So this is going to show you the enumeration, which is the information that it relates to, the value for the fields, and then a display value. So this is sometimes helpful if you're seeing something that you don't want in your UI, an easy way to come in and edit that for yourself, okay? I didn't mention this earlier, but this one is not simply visible by customer admin. It actually requires Customization Administrator as a group permission, okay? So as I mentioned, the approval rule files, they're going to be tied to your document approval flows. We also call them helper files. You'll also see these in receiving and invoice exception processes. Come in and take a look at that menu next. Now I'm skipping over integration. We're going to come in here. I'm not going to hit everyone in this list just because it is extensive. All right, now we'll look at our approval rule files. a little slow here. There we go. And some of these should look a little familiar. If you thought about your approvals in your approval flows, you're going to see cost center owners, or some people just call that cost center manager file. Who's going to handle the exceptions on your invoice exceptions? Do you have an invoice exception handler file? All right, there's the responsible manager. That's typically your cost center manager file. Now, I can download this file. It's going to come out in the CSV file format. Sorry, it flipped over to my other screen there. And you can see for each cost center, there's a responsible manager that's listed, right? That's what a helper file looks like. This could be referenced either in a rule based on an approval rule saying when the cost center is not the requesters, invoke the responsible manager, or you could have an the helper file that's based right in there and just say, okay, I want you to invoke this based on that. Now, if I wanted to...
The leader has dropped from the call, and if the leader doesn't dial back in and rejoin, the conference will be terminated. 30 minutes.
Hopefully we're not going to lose our audio. If I needed to do that, I could make that edit within the within that file and then simply upload it back in here, and it would overwrite right there. You can also make these updates in the approval process flows themselves, but I just wanted to show that here. Okay. Enumerations, as I mentioned, this is going to be a pick list. So within here, we have an expense type pick list. All right, I'm going to export this just so you can see what it looks like. You can import, export. This is going to come out in my Excel file format, I think, based on probably the last time I did any kind of, yeah, so this is coming out in a full Excel. All right, so you can see that this is the field that it's related to. These are the display values, so if I wanted it to look differently, I could, do that. And then that's the value that's in the field. Okay. It's just a quick example. And again, importing directly here and how you want to export the file. Sometimes if you have preceding zeros in your values, the CSV format isn't the best way to go. You have to do Excel. All right. Before I go any further, are there any questions on the Customization Manager and how it's used?
Alice, we do have a question for the previous section.
Yes.
The question. Sometimes exports take too long. Can I kick off the task and pick up the file later?
So it depends on how your imports are set up. If they're running from another source, I don't think you can necessarily kick them off through here. If you are able to do, like if you have web services, you won't be able to do that. If you're able to upload the CSV files and import them yourself, you can. Usually when there's an issue with your imports taking a long time, it can be either the file size, or you may have to contact Ariba customer service to see if there's any issue with the server that you're on. But kicking them off manually within the solution really would require you probably just uploading. It would depend on how you're configured. I hope that answered the question fully.
We have a couple other questions. One is, can you show where enumerations are used? And then the other is, enumerations equal pick list values, right?
Yes, they do equal a pick list value. That particular one I may be able to show you probably in a requisition. I'm assuming that that's where that one was. See. So it had something to do with an expense type, and oh, I have to put an item on here. Let's continue shopping. And I don't want to get too far afield here. Okay. But there should be an expense amount, and I don't know, I don't remember what they were tied to. But you'd have like this has a pick list in it. Some of these have pick lists in them. Material groups and commodity codes don't because they come from a different file, but basically an enumeration will start to look like this for you in a list. I don't know where that particular field was, the one that we have the enumeration for, but that's what it's going to look like in your solution. You're going to have a field, usually a custom field, that you're going to want to have those types from, and they're going to look just like that, a drop down. Sorry, I wasn't completely prepared for that question.
All right, I misstated the question. The question was if a pick list is a drop-down list. So
it is.
Okay. We have one more question. What about exporting the files from data import export? Our files, especially supplier consolidated.csv, take over 30 minutes to export, and I have to stay on that page in order to get the file. Is there a way to export and not have to stay on the page?
I didn't know that was a requirement to stay. I mean, I guess you're right in the sense that you can't start navigating throughout the solution. And again, I mean, that is a large file that you're talking about exporting. So, I mean, you're talking about the supplier consolidated file. I mean, that's a file that's like got 4 things in it. It could take some time to export that. I don't know that I've ever experienced that. I'm not going to, I'm not going to do that. Because if it's going to take 30 minutes, we're not going to do that. I don't know that there's a setting that you can change for anything to that effect, and the fact that it's that big means you have a lot of suppliers in the file. So I'd say it's kind of an unfortunate thing. But again, if your exports are taking that long or your imports are taking that long, that's probably a call you want to make to customer service and just have them take a look at what's going on with your particular site. All right. Shall I continue, Deborah?
Yes.
Okay. So our next area is user manager, and this is actually an area I could spend an entire day, or at least a good portion of a day, talking about, but we won't do that right now. The user manager workspace is used to manage your user information. You're going to see an area that says users and other user information. Group assignments, this is where you're going to do your permissions. If you're not doing them from an external source, you can manage them here within the solution. And delegations. You can also, if you're not using SSO and you want to reset a password, you can do it here. If someone locks out their account, you can unlock it here. And if you needed to activate a deactive user, you could do it here. Also, if you're using approval queues, so some people will use that if they have groups managing a certain approval in their process and they want to manage those approval queues. I can think of like an invoice agent sort of group being, they look at everything before it goes out to the ERP, right? If you wanted to say, okay, so one member of that group is going to take all of the New Jersey ones and another group is going to take all of the South Carolina ones, then you could actually have a queue manager who would do that, or the team, you could let the team manage the queue themselves, but that's all done within the approval queues. All right. I'm going to jump in just a moment, but this is also where, if you've heard the Act As feature, right? So this is almost appointing yourself as a delegate to the individual for the time. So customer administrator, when you have that role, you have the ability to act as another user to manage some transactions or their dashboards, you know, typically done when a user has become inactive and we need to sort of push something along. As that, you cannot, in a production environment, you cannot change that user preference. You can also not create something new as that user, okay? When you look in the audit logs, if someone has done something acting as another, it will show the real user. So it would, if I was to act as Deborah, it will show Alice as the real user and Deborah as the user that was active. Okay, and that's again why, another reason why some people want to pour through the audit logs to see what happens. All right, so I'm going to jump into the solution here. Oh no, I just hit the wrong thing there. Let's go real quick here. There we go. Okay, and so in the user manager, you're going to see this has, so within here, this is users. And this is the data that you can see. So you can see Gene's, where he is in the organization, the email address that's set up, dates that this might have been, this record might have been changed, the supervisor, and the default currency, and even the locale, and that will be here. You could take a look at the group assignments that an individual has to see what's going on. And then this All Groups tab, sometimes these groups, you're going to see they're not exactly the same. These groups may have a parent-child relationship, which means when you give somebody a particular permission, custom maybe permission, it has several grouped together, and that this helps you see those. So if you know that a particular permission is causing an issue or creating a circumstance, you can take a look there. Okay. You have the ability to edit, act as, you can lock this user or unlock if they become locked, and deactivate the user. You could also generate a password, and you could create users. So as a customer administrator, if your users are not being created through another source, like an HR source, you can actually manage those and determine what type, third parties or enterprise. Third parties are external. Okay. The other user information area, this is going to show you things like usually cost centers. You can see some of the information that came from the other. So you can see P cards, their actual location, and then accounting. So this is the cost center and accounting that's assigned to this user that will be defaulting in the solution when he or she creates their transactions. This is where you can look at groups. You can find a list of all the groups in here as well. So if you have custom groups in addition to the system groups, you can see them. Whether or not a user can request responsibility relates to when they create a user profile, whether you allow users to request group membership. Okay. And within these, you can edit the groups, right? Your approval queues, I mentioned before, I don't think we have any in here. Oh, we do. So we have a group called Invoice Conversion Specialist. They can acquire items and they can return items to the queue. If you are familiar with that functionality, this is where you can manage those, all right? And you can deactivate them. You can create new ones. The data import exports here will be visible here, so some areas have that. Another area that's really helpful to customer admin is the ability to create a delegation. A delegation should be created by a user when they're on leave. That helps transactions continue to flow when they're not going to have access or they're going to have intermittent access to activities in the solution, and we don't want to hold them up. They can create a delegation and say, while I'm away for this period of time, you can act as me. There's a different feature called reassignment that when we want to actually take things and give them to another person, lock, stock, and barrel, they can take those documents and they no longer belong to another. But say somebody tragically goes out unexpectedly and they didn't obviously have time to set that delegation. As a customer admin, you can come in and you can create that delegation for another user. Okay, these do not, when we create them as customer admin, go through an approval flow. So if on your user profile you have an approval flow that says this supervisor must approve those, or finance has to approve those before they go into effect, that doesn't take place here. This is an override. All right. Before I go to the next section, are there questions on User Manager?
Alice, no questions on User Manager, but we do have a few questions on the previous sections reviewed.
Okay.
First one is, per Ariba support, it's not possible to view prior delegations that have since expired. Would this be possible to export in the audit log?
I believe they are. I've never done it, though, honestly, so I'd have to see, but you're right. You cannot through the user interface once a user, yes. So because you can look at user profiles in the audit log, you should be able to see the activity, at least if anything was done. I don't know about the delegation itself, when it was set, but you'd be able to see any activity related, like when a user did something as someone else, you would see that user activity. If Deborah, you don't mind taking a note on that one, I will follow up to see how much detail we can get out of the audit logs on delegations.
All right, I have it. The next question goes back to importing and exporting files. When you import files, how long does Ariba allow you to keep them? Or does the system auto-delete after a certain period of time?
No, there's no deletion. So there are some files that you'll load when you first go live and may never ever change again, and they'll just sit there at that point. They just, whatever the last import is the one that the system will hold. So it gets overwritten if you put a new file in. So if every day you're putting in new import files, that will occur. Now on the exports, one thing I found was I could look at the history in my exports for my payment requests up to 6 months, and then the site does seem to archive that information, so you won't necessarily be able to go back and get the details of those exports after 6 months. I believe there are some settings that will allow you to change that, but I think out-of-the-box functionality is 6 months to archive those. So hopefully that answered that question.
All right, that's it from the chat window.
Okay. So moving on from User Manager is our Dashboard Manager. That workspace is used to manage your dashboard templates. Your dashboard is when you log in and you see like your home screen or those different tabs at the top, right? What tabs will be there? What content items, so the My Documents or the to-dos on each of those, and the layout of that dashboard for any new user. So this is what I'll tell you. When you go live, there's a template in there. Usually Ariba has a default that they like. If you were to change the dashboard, it only takes effect for someone who's new. So all your previous users don't get the benefit of that. There's no sort of refresh on that. If you change the template with different content all the time. You can change some of the content, and users themselves can change their content on a one-to-one basis, right? You can also now, with the new user interface, or new user experience, excuse me, you can choose the default theme for your solution. So if you like to go with the these lighter blues that you're seeing here, or there's that dark nighttime city theme, if you like that one, you know, depending on what goes nicely with maybe your company logo and colors, you can change. All right, so I'm going to bounce over here. And the Dashboard Manager. All right, so templates, you're going to see, you can actually have more than one template. That's another kind of really cool thing. So you can create templates and you can rank them based on what's, so you can see here we have one, it's the one that's in the system, and I could create and rank and configure this. You can create templates for groups. So if you wanted to have a specific group see their home dashboard a different way, like all your procurement team versus your end user, you could actually create those templates that way. Okay. And then the dashboard themes, like I said, you can go dark theme, light theme. So if I was to go dark theme and save this, it would create the dark theme would be the one that would be the default for everyone, every new user in the solution. All right. That one's kind of a quick topic. There's not much to go into, but are there any questions on Dashboard Manager?
Alice, we do have a couple of questions, not necessarily on Dashboard Manager, just about the User Manager.
Great.
If a user does not have access to P2P, the P2P realm, but only upstream, can they use the delegation function?
Yeah.
Okay, so it's
delegation is not just a downstream feature. It is an upstream as well. So delegation can be used for your upstream activities.
How can we make sure the upstream user can set delegation for contract approval?
So delegation is at a profile level. It's at a user level. A user essentially takes their, I'm going to say their signature or whatever their authority is within the solution and hands it over to another user through delegation. It's not on a segmented level. You can't say, well, you can only look at my contracts and you can't look at my sourcing activities, or you can't look at this or that. It is, I basically am handing over my profile in this system and you become me for that time. With the caveats that I mentioned before, like a person acting as another can't create new content based, at least not in the downstream, I know that, and they can't change certain things like preferences, and that's an audit risk. So if I was able to go in and act as somebody and also change all their preferences, I could then set myself up, like I could go in and change their user information to the extent that they couldn't get back in and undo things. So we don't allow that. But so there's, as I mentioned before, there's another activity called reassignment. And if I wanted to take, say, for instance, all the contract management activity that I had for a particular commodity maybe, and give that to a new sourcing professional, I could go in and through this reassignment feature, you can reassign activities. Now, I don't know how it works in the upstream, but I know in the downstream, I can take like all my requisitions and I can pick which ones I want and I can keep others, and they become the property of the new person. They are no longer my document. I have no ownership or visibility to them unless I have additional permissions.
Awesome. All right, the next question is, sometimes we export large files so we can edit and then re-import data. Some of the data has leading zeros. When we can use Excel, there's an option to locate data, but leading zeros disappear. Are there some best practices to help when exporting and re-importing data that has leading zeros?
Yes, so there's actually software that helps you with that. And there's different ones. I don't want to go and mention particular ones, but I think you would just go and query for something that's called a CSV editor, and you would look for that type of software, and that will allow you, when you pull these Excel, and all of our files tend to be CSV exports, right? When you pull them down, it'll allow you to hold those preceding zeros and then be able to import again with them. And I know exactly what you're talking about because half my accounting was that way, and it was so cumbersome. But yeah, so there's different software. I don't know of any CSV editor, if you query that, there may be some freeware. You know, and then there's others, most of them I know cost something, but not a significant amount, not a significant investment. Okay.
Next question, can we customize the dashboard view for suppliers as well?
No, not if they're, I mean, anything that they're punching into your P2P sites, you would be able to, but on their network, no. Their network account is their network account.
All right, just a comment on the previous question. One of our guests passes the data to Access and then exports them out with text. So that's an option.
Oh, yeah.
All right.
Yeah, like a notepad type of thing could be done.
Right.
I find that
editor, text,
yeah, that's
text
a little more cumbersome.
CSV editors. There are lots of suggestions coming in.
Yeah, I think there's something called Kill It or something like that is another one. Again, I'm not recommending a particular one, but CSV, I think CSV editor is the name of one, but if you look up, if you were to search on that.
Killing is no longer available. They've stopped selling the license. So the replacement is called Ron's Editor.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you to whomever that was.
All right, the next question is there a template to make everyone have the news portlet on their dashboard?
I'm sorry, the new portlet?
The news. There's a portlet.
Oh, the news portlet.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, so, well, your dashboard template does, yes, it will sort of push that. However, users have the ability to then, so the dashboard template is sort of the starting point. That's you saying, this is what I want everyone to have, right? This is when a new user joins, this is what I want their dashboard to look like. However, users can customize their own look and feel, and they can take content off. And there, to my knowledge, is no way to keep them from deleting the news section on Ariba. And I've had that issue myself because we used to use it a lot for updates when, you know, if there was a particular initiative going on or something like that. Yeah. No, I don't think you can keep them from doing it, but within the template you can set it and make sure that it's at the top if that's what you want for home. Okay.
All right. This is the next question. I hear these terms a lot. What is upstream and what is downstream?
Well, we're not supposed to use them anymore. So Deborah's going to slap me on the wrist if I said it. But so what the way that you can purchase your solutions from Ariba is there's sourcing, there's contracts, there's procurement, and then there's Invoice Pro. And that's a very broad because there's bits and pieces in there. And within those, you have sort of realms, and the sourcing and the contracts is considered what we call it an upstream versus the procurement and invoicing, which is the downstream flow of activity. And contract compliance is the bridge between those two. But so when we say upstream, we're generally talking about your sourcing and contract management solution. And when we say downstream, we're talking about your procurement, your procure to pay, or your procurement and invoicing solutions. There's something afoot to get us to sort of better nomenclature for those two, but I'm going to explain it that way to you for right now.
Good job. All right, last question. Users cannot see the delegation on the preference drop-down list if they only have upstream access.
They cannot see it if they only have. No, I'm pretty sure delegation is available upstream, but Deborah, I don't know, maybe you have better knowledge of this about where they access it?
Right. I will look and answer that question privately, but I know that they do have delegation access on the contract sourcing and SIPM side, but we'll get the answer to you.
Yeah.
So we have about 15 minutes left, Alice.
Yeah, I want to keep going.
Yeah.
All right, so let's plow through. I promise if we have a little bit of time at the end, I'll circle back. And my next section isn't as meaty. So supplier manager, this is an area where we're going to, in the interface that we're going to use to view, add, delete, modify your supplier data in Ariba. This is one of those I always say, you got to be careful about who has access. Now, your supplier data could be coming from another source, your ERP, right? You can edit activity in here. It's not necessarily going to overwrite your ERP, or it's not going to, but you could, for an interim time between those feeds, you could alter data in the solution. All right. You can also view your links between your common and that says portioned, and it should say partition suppliers. I'll have to correct that. And that connection, that link, is when you're using your supplier. If you use a supplier in your sourcing and your contract activities, you don't necessarily always procure with them. And so that common supplier record is the one that exists for those sourcing and contract activities. When you procure with them, they need to have the partition supplier record. That's the piece that allows all the procurement and invoicing. And when I say procurement activities, I do include invoicing activities. When they are, when you're using your procurement activities, they need to have a partitioned supplier record in there. And so this is one way where you can actually check to make sure that your supplier is set up for end-to-end processes. I'm going to bounce in. Hopefully I haven't lost my connection while we've been chatting away. But here's your supplier manager area. You're going to see there's not a lot out here, but you can take a look by searching your common. All suppliers have to have a common supplier record. Whether or not they have a partition supplier record allows them to be used in your procurement activities, right? So I can do that. I can actually just search for the ones that are network enabled so that I know that I can transact with over the Ariba network. I can also filter for things that are active or inactive. So we could, let's say yes, and then we'll list all and see what we get. Right, so these are suppliers that I can transact over the network with in this realm, and you can see we have a lot of stuff. But that lets me know that they're set for that. They're also active. All right, I'm going to come back in and head on over to Catalog Manager, which is very directly interrelated with your supplier manager. So your Catalog Manager, this area is where you're going to manage your catalog files, those kits, the views. So you may have catalogs that you don't want every user to see. That's called the catalog view, and you can maintain that here. Some other files that you would have seen in your customization manager that are used here are one of them is the unit of measure. So this is when we say, each box, keg, however you're procuring those unit of measures, there's a file that is in your system that says which ones you will use and which ones you will not use, right? And then this, the other thing in here is your index builder. So when you're making changes to your catalogs, you can make them, but then you have to push them out to your users, and that's called building the index. That is something that I always tell people you do late in the day or you do after hours, because these activities can take a long time depending on the size and the complexity of your catalogs. Okay. We're going to come in and just take a real quick look through that catalog manager area. All right, you're going to see there's a lot in here I didn't talk about. So I talked about the kits, the catalogs, your validation rules, okay? So you can create custom validation rules in addition to the ones that are out of the box. Your views, this is who's going to be able to, which users will be able to view that catalog. how the relevance ranking, so within the different catalogs, what their relevance is, a hierarchy, building hierarchies within there. This is the index builder, so once you create the change, you got to come in and run the index builder to push that out. You know, measures, here's the data import exports related to your catalogs, your scheduled tasks, and you're going to see that there's all of these are available here. So if I just come in quickly, I can see the catalogs that are visible or available, right? So these are all the different ones and what kind they are. So you can take a look and see whether, you know, this is a punch out, whether it's activated. So this one is coming from the supplier, which means it's a punch-out catalog versus these are more likely to be some sort of, you know, you could have ones that are going to be a CIF catalog, which is where you host the file, usually yourself, and then update that. And you can see there's a lot of you can delete subscriptions to those. You can delete a version. You can deactivate a catalog if you want to. You can send it for approval. There's a lot of activity here. All right. And then I don't know if we have any. I forgot to check this. No, we didn't have any. So you could actually create catalog views based on like a commodity code. And then anything that's in that commodity can only be seen by a certain group or something of that nature. Okay. That's kind of common, actually. A lot of companies like to control assets like IT, and so they have specific groups that procure them, and they don't want necessarily everybody in the organization to do that. Okay. Before I head into procure to pay, or actually let me head into that because we are tight on time, and this is a big one. So procure to pay manager, this is where you're going to you're going to be able to manage your invoice exception rules and your receiving types. You're also going to be able to look at your payment methods, supplier payment methods in here. Your bank locations can be managed within this workspace. There's a lot in here. This is another one of those workspaces that I could spend a half a day talking about. We're not going to do that, obviously, because we only have a few minutes, but I'm going to get in there, drive in, and show you a couple of key things. We're going to hit the high point. You're going to see I'm skipping over quite a bit in here. If you use P-cards, there's the P-card manager area. If you're taxes, there's a tax manager area as well. All right. So your invoice exception types, you can manage in your procure to pay. And if you know about invoice exceptions, you know that you can apply them to the type of invoice. I'm actually just going to do a quick list all so you can see what they look like, whether or not the invoice exception is header level and how it applies. And you can edit those and you can see the attributes of any given one in here. Okay. So if you want to know about what exception types, this is one place that you can manage them. There's also files that are related to these that are going to be in your customization area that you may want to look at if you need to customize those, okay? Your receiving types, again, same thing. If you have receiving by commodity, so here we have different types and how each one is. So if it's in this commodity, it's going to be a manual receipt and you're going to receive by quantity. But if it's this, you're going to do a manual receipt and it's going to be received by amount. That's typically like services get done that way so that you can not have to manage by the quantity and instead by the amount, right? Your payment methods, what payment methods you'll accept, you can process, you know, these are usually tied to your ERP, and so you'll also see these in your data import exports. The receiving types by, so we did it by commodity code, you could also do it by a part number specific. Your payment terms, so you have a set of payment terms, again, tied into your ERP usually. This is where you're going to be able to see and manage those. You also have a file for this in your data import export that you can use. Your bank locations and your supplier payment information can be managed here as well. Right, so you can look at a supplier and start to manage that payment method model in here. Okay, that was a real fast blow by in the procure to pay manager. So I'm gonna take a moment, pause for any questions there before I wrap this up.
All right, we do have a couple of questions, Alice. The first one, can you export the list of enabled suppliers with system ID?
You can export suppliers. Let me see. I don't know if the system ID is in that, so we'd have to take a look. There's usually an export in here in the suppliers listing. I don't know that their system ID is in here. So I'll take that one back and see. But no, I don't know that their system, oh, it should be. It may be. So there may be an ability, but let me take a look at that one, and if you could take a note of who, I'll follow up.
All right, the next question is, in our organization, admins for sourcing and contracts also have core admin access. They say it is required to do their activities. If they have their own admin access, is it safe to remove the core admin for them? What I'd like you to show, Alice, is the difference between administration and core administration.
Yeah, okay. So here we have administration, and it should flip. Okay, so what I want you to notice is the URL here. The URL moved from buyer to sourcing. This is where we talk about upstream, downstream. So this is, I'm in a different part of my realm, basically. I'm in my sourcing realm, and you're going to see that this is different here, right? So you're going to see there's a reporting manager. The customization manager is here. So this has to do with what you've got in each of these solutions and what you have access to. So your supplier managers, if they, right, so supplier and customer manager, if they're only needing to do that for their upstream activities, their sourcing activities, they should not, I don't believe they should need the customer administrator, and because that customer administrator gives you access to core admin. And one of the things that I don't usually talk about because we're kind of procure to pay in this session, but when you give, there are certain permissions that when they're granted in your procurement solution, and then you have an integrated solution, sourcing, contracts, and procurement, when you have sourcing and contracts, some of those permissions create what we call those seat licenses. They're sort of chargeable, and you want to be careful about granting those, and core administrator, custom administrator is one of them. So you don't necessarily have to have, depending on what it is, you don't necessarily have to have customer administrator to be able to do your, your administrative work. Let's hope this just goes, it's because it jumped around. You're going to see right there, now I'm in the buyer section. So sourcing and buyer, those are the two. I've kind of jumped the stream there.
All right, Alice, it's 12 o'clock, and I know that for the most part, people may need to leave because it's 12 o'clock on the hour. I do have a couple of questions, and we can stay around for a few minutes after the call to answer the rest of the questions. If you want to ask a question right now, please hit *6 on your phone or enter the question into the chat window. We'll stay around for another 15 minutes. Alice, why don't you go ahead and do your wrap-up, and then we'll end the recording.
Okay. So just a few best practice, I guess, tips or notes for administration. You want to understand the permissions, right? The manager and administrator roles can directly access data used in your procurement system. Although your source of truth may be from another system, you want to be sure that the people that have access to that data can, and potentially manipulate it are the people that should. So understand a permission before you grant it. And as I just said, there are some that when you grant them in your procurement solution will cause a license to be used in your sourcing or contracts area, so be careful of that. Use these tools, right? They are here for you as administrators. They can tell you a lot about what's going on in your procurement tool. You can actually use them to diagnose an issue. You know, if you're looking at those imports and you're seeing an exclamation point, an error, you know that something hasn't taken place. That could explain why a supplier is not available if your supplier load is failing, right? Maintain your system. So particularly when you're looking, I want you to review those permissions with some regularity, quarterly maybe, annually at least. Make sure that you're validating the people that have access, these particular accesses. They do, you want to mitigate that risk. There is a risk involved in having people in these roles when they can access and change data, right? That's real. Viewing that data, not so much. Editing that data, big deal, right? So that's why you want to kind of take a look at it. Maintain your helper files for approvals and enumerations. Make sure that those are kept up to date. When they're not, then your system doesn't perform well for your users. Update your catalogs. Make sure that you're deactivating old ones, or that you're, you know, if an item is end of life, that you're taking it out. Again, better user experience when you maintain the solution. Use these to audit and reconcile. You know, there's a lot that you can figure out in a reconciliation. Remember, Ariba is very seldom the source of truth for the data, other than the PO or sometimes the receipt. Everything else comes from a different source. Take a moment, audit your solution, and reconcile against other systems to make sure that things are working as they should. You can learn a lot, okay? Lastly, I'd just like to tell you, well, thank you very much for joining me, but we have a lot of wonderful webinars scheduled coming up. And this is the next one is working with notifications. I believe Colin Flaherty is presenting that one on the 26th, so that's next week. Well, actually, you're getting a twofer on the 26th, because then we have upstream reporting overview, so you can take a look at that one. You're going to notice this really odd time here, November 2nd, working with the notifications. It's a repeat of this one here, and it's for our APJ, so our Asia Pacific group. If you know anyone or have colleagues that are in that time zone that might be better suited to those times, we do welcome them to join. There's a whole list of others that we have on the site and will be available for registration very soon. So with that, I'm going to say, if you, I'm part of the BPC as well as Deborah. As subscribers to Ariba Solutions, you are given BPC hours with your new subscription, and many companies choose to purchase them ongoing. We are strategic virtual consultants. We can help you with all of what you saw today if you want to take a deeper dive. If you know who your BPC consultant is, you can reach out to them directly. If you don't, contact your customer engagement executive, your CEE, and they can put you in touch with us. We're here to make sure that you get the best use and adoption from your system. And with that, I will say thank you very much.
All right, Alice, thank you. I'm going to stop the recording now.